Tony, hi.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm very grateful that you are here and you're going to talk to our guests about your experience in property management and also maybe a little bit about your amazing posts that you are posting on LinkedIn. That it seems like you're traveling a lot, or I don't know, but I'll ask you more about that later. So let's start with a little bit introduction about you and
Sure.
Caxton.
Yeah,
Over
okay.
to you.
So I started my career at 16 years old in a youth traineeship scheme or apprenticeship at a tenant management cooperative in Plumstead. So River Heights TMC managed two 24-story tower blocks in Plumstead. It's where the residents essentially applied for the right to manage from Greenwich Council. They took over the management of the tower blocks, and they employed some staff, including myself, to run the tower blocks. But whilst I was there, we were sort of, because tenant management cooperatives were quite rare back then, and in fact even now they're still quite rare.
Mm.
There's only something like 240 throughout the whole country in terms of tenant management organisations, because I think a lot of tenants, social housing tenants, don't realise they've got the right to apply to manage
Yeah.
their own properties. So whilst I was there, we were kind of going around the country, sort of preaching the message of right to manage, really.
Hmm.
So we did that for some years. And then whilst I was there at River Heights, I sat on a steering committee, advising kind of the government on sort of the right to manage policies and procedures, and basically how a right to manage company worked from day to day. As I say, because they were
Yeah.
quite rare, so they were looking for kind of that sort of insight, really. So yeah, so I did that for kind of 10 years. Got
Okay.
into a position where I was managing the TMC, and kind of what I like to do, because I'd come from a youth apprenticeship. I like to give back, so I was recruiting
Yeah.
apprenticeships while I was there, and we stayed in contact for years. And we're kind of they've gone on to have great careers in the property management industry. So yeah, so I did that for 10 years, and then I moved to Caxtons. I've been
Yep.
here 19 years now. Um, Started as just a block manager,
Yeah.
progressed to becoming a senior property manager, and then eventually head of our estate and block management department, and eventually becoming an associate director at Caxtons. I have since, for personal reasons, taken a step down. I did that for about 8 years, but I've taken a step down to become back to being a senior property manager now. But yeah, at our peak, we were managing 7,500 units in Kent, Southeast London, and Essex, across 240 sites. Our department's kind of, we've got about 15 people in our department. But yeah, as I say, next year I'll be doing it kind of 20 years. So in terms of block management, like, there's not a lot I haven't seen
Yes,
in that time.
I can
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah, the weird and wonderful world of property management.
Wow, long time you've been in the industry for sure. And what type of buildings you manage, like at the moment? Like what is your favorite buildings type of?
So I posted recently on LinkedIn a building in Blackheath, which is 14 Georgian Grade One listed houses in a crescent shape, and that by far they've been my most favourite site to
Yeah.
manage. The fact that it's Grade One listed, they've filmed sort of period films there.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the houses, in fact, was bombed during the Second World War, was completely demolished, and they had to completely rebuild it from scratch. But if you visit the site today, you wouldn't know any different. It doesn't look like it's been completely rebuilt.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And again, I posted recently. They've got the last remaining gas lamps in the borough of Greenwich there. Literally, the street lamps are powered by gas, and yeah, it's just an
Amazing.
amazing site to manage.
Yeah, I recommend to everyone to follow your on posts. They're amazing, and there are a
Mm.
lot of history as well, which is great. And do you travel to these sites that you post about, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I say, we're predominantly based in Kent, but we
Okay.
manage sites in. We've got a few in central London, a few in southeast London,
Hmm.
some in Essex, and then broadly speaking, right the way down the Kent coast,
Yeah,
Canterbury, Gillingham, Broadstairs, Margate. We've got them everywhere in Kent.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and some of them we've had. I mean, Caxtons now. Um, this year will have been going for 35 years. And
Wow.
some of the sites we've managed for that length of time. So yeah, so we've got great relationships with some of our clients, and yeah, and we're picking up sort of kind of new business all the time, really through word of mouth, because we don't tend to market ourselves too
Yeah,
much.
yeah,
It's really just kind of recommendations and what they see online kind of thing.
yeah. You've definitely succeeded for 35 years, Caxton. So well done on that. Yeah,
Thank you.
amazing. And what is your typical day? Tell me about your typical day. It seems
Okay,
like
so
you.
yeah, so my typical day. So I actually work with my daughter. My daughter works as part of our administration team that support the property managers. So we drive in to work every day.
Oh, that's
Obviously,
nice.
first things first, you open the dreaded inbox and see how your day is going to pan out, because even if you've got sort of your diaries booked up with
Yeah.
bits and pieces, that can soon change in an instant. We've had instances where one of the property managers was driving into work one day, and she heard on the radio that there'd been a fire at a block of flats, which just happened to be her site.
Oh, wow.
So instead of coming to the office, she drove straight to site, and it was
Oh,
kind of mayhem. So,
yeah.
but yeah, no, so it can change in an instant. So, checking those emails, seeing what your day's going to be like, and then hopefully getting out and doing some site visits, checking out
Yeah.
your sites. Particularly in the life of a property manager can be difficult, but I would say in the summer months that's the only bonus, getting to kind of go out on site in the sun, and
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
yeah,
Meeting with the gardeners and,
yeah, absolutely,
I like
absolutely,
I like that.
yeah,
I definitely miss going out on sites.
yeah,
It
yeah.
used to be pre-COVID was like a regular thing, but it's not anymore.
No,
Um,
no, no.
Battling on emails, it's more of a day-to-day, really.
Yes, absolutely.
And how often do you would you say you go out to visits?
So to be honest, I try and at least do 3 or 4 visits a week. Our management agreements kind of say that we're supposed to do sort of monthly site visits, but to be
Okay.
honest, we tend, as managers, we tend to do more than that. And of course, if
Yeah.
something's happening on site, if we're doing external redecoration or a major project, obviously we
Yeah.
could be on site kind of every day, just sort of overseeing that, see how everything's going. So but
Yeah.
yeah, we like to be as out and proactive as possible. The temptation is to kind of sit at your desk and respond to emails all day, but the trouble with that is you're not on the front foot. You're kind of just being a bit reactive. So
Yeah. There is also a lot of little things that leaseholders can email, right? And just letting them know that it's not a priority. It's like, how do you handle that email to say, I've received your email, but I'll come back to you next week. And they're like, but it's urgent, and it
you
isn't.
know, I often say that managing properties is kind of straightforward. It's the people that make it difficult.
Yeah.
We've all got those difficult leaseholders that tend to email you every day, or they're on the phone. And you're right. You've got to kind of manage expectations.
Mm.
As a property manager, you kind of in this day and age, everything is 100% faster than it was. 15, 20
Yeah.
years ago, because back then you'd kind of get in the morning and you might have a couple of emails, but principally people used to send in letters.
Yes.
So gone are the days where you've got a bit of time to respond to a letter. Now it's an email, and people want a response almost immediately.
Yes,
And
yes,
I'm sure you've come across it where you'll get an email, and an hour later you'll get a phone call from someone saying, "Oh, did you get my email?"
yes.
Well, yeah, we did, but give us a chance.
Yeah, yeah. How do you set the expectations? Because obviously, let's say you've done the budget, it's been approved, demands have sent, and obviously everyone's paying, and there is a certain budget that you're working from, right? And
Hmm.
then you get all these emails of like, oh, this needs doing, oh, that needs doing, and you're like, but it's not in the budget, and it can wait. If we have any money left at the end of the year, and how is that received from leaseholders, from some of them at least?
Yeah, it's funny. I had that conversation, funny enough, just last week.
Mm.
We manage a site where it's just estates, so it's just the gardening that we do there, and the budget had gone up £11 over the year, so
Oh wow.
less than a pound a month it had gone up. But on this site, there's over.
Significant amount.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you
Um,
manage
but
that?
on this site, there's over 100 units, and you'd
Okay.
be surprised how many calls we got to say
Yeah.
from people. Well,
Yeah.
why has it gone up? And the
Mm.
trouble is, after a while in this industry, you learn to kind of preempt stuff. So
Yeah.
I sent out a letter explaining why, in fact, it had gone up, because basically there were tree works that were required. We'd gone and got some quotes,
Okay.
and we put it in the budget because we knew some tree works had to be done.
Mm.
So
And it's
but
expensive. Yeah.
exactly, tree works is expensive, right? So we kind of we wrote out, but even when you write out, you still get the odd phone call from people saying, "Oh, well, it's gone up a bit. We're not too happy about it." But you kind of explain why you've had to do it, and in fact, we've got a number of quotes. They're the cheapest. But I think once you explain the process, people understand and they're okay with it.
Yeah. And also understanding the admin that is around it, because sometimes you need to call or submit an application to the local council,
That's right.
and
Exactly.
that can take few weeks, and
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
setting the type of tree and all sorts of things
Exactly.
that
Yeah. Yeah. Particularly we find in where we manage sites in London, there are a lot of trees with tree preservation orders
yeah,
on them.
yeah,
And you're right. I mean, I've seen people be fined where they haven't got the necessary consent. So yeah,
yeah,
it's absolutely important. I mean, it's that is the thing about being a property manager. There are so many different aspects that you've kind of got to be aware of when you're managing properties and estates. It's
yeah.
yeah, I often say, as a property manager, it's kind of jack of all trades, master of none. You got to really be on your game.
Absolutely. So what takes most of your as time wise, what takes most of your time during the day? The sites, the um dealing with budgets, admin, what is it that it's
I,
really
I think that, as I say, I think the thing that nowadays takes up a lot of property managers' time is dealing with emails and
Mm,
correspondence from leaseholders. I mean, we quite often send communication out to leaseholders, but tenants as well, so that the
yeah,
tenants are informed. But that in itself creates a lot of work because we get quite a lot of queries from tenants, and
yeah,
sometimes you just have to say, look, speak to your landlord, because
yes,
obviously they're the ones paying the service charge. So we will have explained to them why the service charge is what it is and what the limitations are of
yeah,
that. So, but I would say definitely nowadays that is predominantly what is taking a lot of property managers' time, is dealing with emails and
mm,
leaseholders. As I say, everyone's got a smartphone now, so they'll be on the way to work sending an email from their phone.
yeah.
And the volumes, as I say, being in the industry for nearly 20 years in block management, the volume of emails has just gone through the roof, quite honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have landlord, agent, tenant, and you're trying to obviously get everyone the message across to everyone,
Yeah.
just so you minimize interactions, but then also often can be, "Oh, I didn't receive it," and,
Mm.
they didn't receive the email, and then the landlord didn't send it to the agent, and so on. So it's just becoming like, what is the best action here? You
Yeah.
know,
Absolutely.
that
Abs-
we be efficient with, maybe needing access, checking fire alarms and smoke detectors or whatever it is in the property that is connected to to the communal areas. So
yes.
yeah, we also find very difficult that communication, and often you often say at the beginning of a when we are setting up a new property, please give us details of your agent, of your tenant. We assure you that the message is gone to all, and but we still need a little bit of communication between you as parties involved with your agent and the agent with the tenant.
Yes.
Because it often happens when the tenant can also refuse access, or and then you as block manager get involved with the
Yes.
tenant.
Yes. Exactly. Yes.
It's not,
Yeah.
definitely not an easy
No,
not an easy
not
task.
easy at all.
No. And do you often go to, AGMs in person, or, they are now
Yeah,
online?
so I think kind of after COVID, obviously everything moved to Zoom and Teams. So we are doing some meetings via that means still, but I think some of our clients still prefer, face to face. And I would say from a personal point of view, I prefer face to face.
Yeah,
It's a lot easier trying to speak to a lot of people face to face rather than trying to do it via Zoom or Teams. So yeah, definitely we're still doing meeting AGMs and directors meetings face to face. Um, We've kind of put our foot down a little bit in recent years in that we used to go to some meetings where they'd start at kind of 8 o'clock at night and you'd still be
mm,
there nearing 11 o'clock.
yeah,
And the guidance now says, the meeting shouldn't start any later than 7 p.m. and you
yeah,
should be done by 9 p.m. So we're kind of trying to stick to that really. I don't think people realise that it's a long day for a property manager. They kind of get in usually a
yeah,
little bit early to get on top of their emails. They do a full day at work, and then you've got a couple of hours waiting to the meeting to start, and you go to the meeting. And at that meeting, you're kind of sometimes you're chairing the meeting, you're
yes,
taking minutes, plus you're answering questions that are being fired at you.
yeah,
It's a long day, and kind of when you're at that meeting, you've really got to be at your peak. You've got to be ready and
yeah.
ready to answer questions from
Yeah.
leaseholders and residents. And so yeah, so
And
it can be
you definitely prepare at least like an hour or two. You're working with the accounts team, you're working with looking at, the agenda that you've prepared for the meeting. And I mean, the fun bit comes when no one is following the agenda and they start fighting about things.
absolutely. I mean, that's the only advantage I would say with chairing the meeting. If you do chair the meeting as a
Yeah.
property manager, you can kind of steer them through the agenda and move things along. Sometimes when you get directors chairing the meetings, they can take a little bit longer, just because they're sort of answering questions as they go,
Yeah.
and it's yeah, as a property manager, it's a bit easier when you are chairing them and you can just guide everyone through that through that.
You try your best for sure, but it's not
Yeah,
always followed, isn't it?
no,
And it's the
no,
understanding that what I'm trying to put here as to all leaseholders and directors to understand that AGM can take, or EGM, or just a general meeting as well every quarter or whatever it is, necessary for the building. It does take to a property manager 4 to 5 hours to prepare, to make sure all the stats are ready and all the answers can be answered, at the meeting, because otherwise it's like taking an answers and then I'll come back to you. And there might be one or two questions, but, in general, it takes such long time to prepare for AGM. And when you say that, you kind of give couple of hours to leaseholders, um, and directors at that meeting, and then you might apply an additional charge. It's very often disputed as of like why, and trying to explain as of what it takes you as a property manager to prepare. It's
Yes.
something that is misunderstood at the moment, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely, at 100%. Yeah, I mean, you can't really over prepare for an AGM. You kind of, as you say, it takes hours to prepare and get everything ready. You know, they want to know, and this is where I say, as a property manager, you kind of need to have so many different hats.
Yeah,
You need to understand a bit about the service charge accounts, the service charge budget, a bit about arrears recovery, where you are with that. Obviously, yeah, where you are in terms of your cyclical maintenance, your
yeah.
external, internal redecorations. Yeah, there's a lot to be on top of, definitely.
And lately I find it's more about debtors and, like, arrears process, and we've had way more, I would say, than I've ever known in my career. In
Yeah,
us in the past few years, it's just increasing and increasing. But it's also sometimes you just don't get an email or a call from the leaseholders to say, I'm in financial difficulties and, I can't make payments. So I would like to say to everyone who is in the financial difficulties out there, and please contact your property manager, speak to them, and this can be reached without, any further court summons being, sent across, and judgments and so on, because it's firstly it's lengthy process, but also you as a leaseholder, you don't want to get into that side of, bad credit and so on. So do definitely speak to your property managers about that.
yeah, 100%, and we will work with you on that, definitely.
Yeah, and send across to the directors, and just come into, and because also the other side of it is, if you don't know, sending a budget, especially I'm talking about smaller buildings where you're sending the budget and you're expecting everyone to pay. And the reason why is because you're working on a small budget, right? You're trying to, every year is like, well, let's keep it to a minimum. Let's keep it to a minimum. And there is not much to work on, anything that is not planned and it comes unexpected to the building as an issue.
Yeah,
And then it just takes one or two people that won't pay. And it's usually, I mean, quarterly, half yearly, or annually. But even if it's quarterly, you still have those arrears, and it's like, but we allowed on money, to come in so we can manage this property effectively. And we reached couple of weeks ago, we had this situation, a nice building in central London. It's only 5 units, but they're kind of maisonettes and, kind of large, and they have big service charge and maintenance to run. Well, we went out to £300 because basically no one was paying. And then what do you do? So we had to cancel all services and said, we're handing over the property back to you. But the reason why it came to that is because they all have kind of personal a relationship that isn't great. And then it just becomes like, well, she's not paying, then I'm not paying. And it just becomes this relationship that you don't want to be in.
yeah.
There's
Mm.
so many of these scenarios that you just, you don't, you only learn about them on the day.
That's
And
right.
talking about lesson experience and scenarios,
Mm.
is there any story that comes across and you would like to share with us
Yeah, I would.
tomorrow?
So, going back to the site I mentioned earlier that we manage, the Grade One listed buildings, in Blackheath in London,
Mm.
um, we were doing an external redecoration process there. So obviously went out to tender. I think we got 5 or 6 quotes. Now the cheapest quote to undertake the redecoration there was over £600,000. So this was probably about 10 years ago now.
Mm.
But there was one particular leaseholder that was questioning the process, and in particular the Section 20 process. Now, obviously, as a property manager, that's kind of one thing that you quickly have to learn,
Yeah.
and be on top of. And of course, bearing in mind that that legislation now is quite old.
Yeah.
and the threshold is still only £250 per leaseholder.
Please increase it.
Yeah, I know. It's in this day and age, that is crazy. It's absolutely
Takes you
crazy
nowhere, yeah.
that it hasn't changed. But there was one particular leaseholder question in the process, and um, they were picking at the notices that we were serving in terms of the Section 20.
Mhm.
Now, bearing in mind that those Section 20 notices aren't actually prescribed notices. They give you the sort of wording that you're supposed to use, and the
Yeah,
rough kind of format in the guidance, but there isn't actually a prescribed notice. So the things that this leaseholder was kind of sort of picking up on
yeah,
was to do with some of that. So we were kind of, at the time, personally, as the property manager, I was fretting a little bit, because I was thinking, well,
yeah.
you know, if we get this wrong, we're Caxtons are in for kind of over £450,000,
Yes, yes,
because obviously they can limit their contribution to two
yes.
hundred and fifty
To
pounds.
250,
So,
yeah.
so yeah, I must admit, I kind of for a few weeks I sweated, and in fact, in the end, I played it safe. I got a bit of legal advice on our notices, and we reserved the first part notice. So it delayed the works by a month, but we reserved the first part notice, just to make sure that everything was spot on.
Yeah,
Yeah, but so a word of warning to property managers out there, obviously, is just be on top of your Section 20 process. They are talking about bringing in prescribed notices, which will be
mhm,
great. Then everybody be working from the same template then,
yeah,
essentially. So I think, but yeah, it's still a bit, as I say, the process is still a bit kind of outdated. But I understand why it's there. It's there to protect leaseholders,
yeah,
particularly from rogue landlords, who go gun ho, spending money left, right, and centre, and then want leaseholders to pay for it. So
yeah.
it has to be there, that legislation. But I just think it definitely needs updating in terms of the threshold.
And it's so important to have done like a schedule of works before you even start the consultation notices and start the process, just because you need to list as much as what you're doing, rather than, and sometimes it's like roof replacing, but you can add so many other things to it that are involved in that,
Yeah,
because it has happened to me where a leaseholder will basically come and say, but you did not mention that in the consultation. You did not specify that. So, and I very often have, not very often, but a few times have been in a similar situation. It's like, oh, did I serve this correctly? Will they pay?
yeah,
And yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Section 20 is a kind of straightforward, but you've got like you've got to be very specific on what works, and you may not carry out one, but you can't carry one that you've not mentioned. So
Yeah,
so definitely a follow up. And has it happened to you when, because sometimes some works may be urgent, right, and you are trying to follow the process, but has it happened to you when you basically had to start earlier than the part
yeah,
consultation
yeah.
expires, and you
Yeah, we took on a block a couple of years ago now. We took on a block down in Ashford in Kent,
Mhm.
quite a big block, and the day two of management, the brick slips that essentially cladded the building literally all fell off one side of the building.
Oh, wow.
So one side of the building just completely, the external brickwork just fell apart. We had to kind of get up there and get scaffolding up, because it's quite a tall building, make it safe, and also start the process to kind of get works underway ASAP, because it meant the building wasn't watertight, and there was further risk to kind of people walking below. So we applied for dispensation,
Yeah.
which from my experience is just one of a handful of times I've had to do that. Unfortunately, in this case, they did give us dispensation, but
Mm.
yeah, it's again, it's a tough call for a property manager to kind of weigh up really what to sort of to do in that instance when it is urgent, because I
Yeah.
think the first tier tribunal would argue that for a lot of stuff that you should have foreseen this. It's no good saying, "Oh, we need
Yeah.
dispensation to replace the roof because the
Yeah.
roof's failing." Well, you should have planned for that. You should have known that that was going to need doing because it's X amount of years old. So yeah, it's no good applying for dispensation on that. It's kind of really got to be sort of sudden and unforeseen
Yeah.
circumstances for them to sort of grant dispensation.
But it again, it just comes to you as property manager, you provide that information to your directors and leaseholders as a whole at meetings, and you say that the roof is very old. It will give in at some point in the next couple of years per se, and you have no money in the reserve fund or a small amount of money, but they still continue to like, no, we're not going to increase the reserve fund. No, we're not going to do the works now. And then when this happens, when you just mentioned, is how it just comes to you pulling your hair out and thinking,
Mm,
how do I resolve this? When
absolutely.
when you've just been looking into it. And like you said, dispensation is not always the case of like applying and be given and then you carry
No,
out the works.
no,
So,
no.
but Section 20, it does require so much time,
Hmm.
isn't it?
Yeah, definitely,
The
definitely.
preparation of
Yeah.
meeting contractors,
Mhm.
going to sites,
Yeah.
and it could be anything. And how do you tackle that of like, how involve what's your involvement in the entire process? Just
Yeah.
because we started talking about Section 20 process, and I think that is a very good topic to cover because,
Yeah.
again, I don't think leaseholders understand the involvement that
No.
it is. It's not just serving notices.
No, it isn't. You're right. It's quite an in-depth process. Obviously, we use a project administrator, who's usually a qualified surveyor,
Mhm.
to essentially project manage the works. So we do all the kind of the admin in terms of serving the notices. If leaseholders have put forward kind of nominations for contractors, we'll
Yeah.
pass those on to the project administrator. Yeah, and then we're still heavily involved because, of course, as soon as you start serving the notices, the queries will come from leaseholders, particularly when you start talking about the funds required. Is that going to be
Yeah.
a cash call or is that going to be coming from reserve? And yeah, but we tend to rely on the surveyor because this is the thing: as a property manager, most of us aren't actual qualified surveyors.
Qualified.
So and in fact, leaseholders aren't paying for us to be, qualified surveyors. Otherwise, they'd be paying a lot more in terms of management fees. So when it comes to specialist works, major works, we'll use a surveyor. Costs a bit of money, but essentially that's what you want to make sure that the works are being done properly, make sure
Yeah.
they're being overseen. They'll go up and do routine inspections while the contractor's on site. Going up on scaffolding, inspecting the roofs and the paintwork and making
Yeah.
sure it's been done properly. Yeah, and then kind of the surveyor, once it's all done and dusted, the surveyor will kind of rubber stamp it and make sure that all the snagging's done and that everybody's happy with it. And ultimately, kind of if there are any problems, it's essentially that surveyor's liability. Ultimately,
Yeah. And
yeah,
there are jobs that require 2, 3 quotes, and every
mhm,
time you attend and obviously you follow, the process of the specification
yep,
and, answer questions to contractors as
yep,
well. And
yep,
then starting with, uh, uh, because you also maybe need access sometimes to certain flats and making
yep,
sure that they are there. But yeah, Section 20 takes a very long time, and
yeah,
sometimes it again, leaseholders are oh, you've just served the consultation notice, the first, you've served section 20, we're ready to start, right? And I'm
Mhm.
like, no. So,
Yeah,
explaining. And
yeah,
in terms of, you've just mentioned that you're using a surveyor for
yeah.
specifications, but it's not
Mhm.
for all section 20s, right? There are section
No,
20 that you as property manager are comfortable
yeah.
working on. And what type of projects that you as property manager are comfortable to
Yeah, so to be honest,
manage?
mostly kind of internal redecorations, replacement carpets, replacement intercom systems. They're
Yeah.
the kind of things, maybe installing electronic gates,
Yep.
major lift works. Those are the kind of things where, as a property manager, we're comfortable in kind of overseeing those works and making sure that we've got competitive quotes
Yeah.
and you know we've got an approved contractor list, so we just go out to a number of our contractors and get quotes. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, as a property manager, we're comfortable in dealing with those sort of works, and obviously dealing with the queries from leaseholders as they come in. And then just making sure that everything's been done once the work's been undertaken, make sure everything's done properly. Yeah,
Yeah, and the major works that are requiring a surveyor and a competent person, in my case, it's more structural and roofs and even
yeah,
lifts can be part of that, and
yeah, yeah.
anything else that it is, we're not the specialist,
No,
but because there is also it's also the fees that that are paid to consultant surveyor, and then the fees that are paid to property managers, they're obviously the property management agent, and they're adding up, right? And
yeah,
then leaseholders need to understand why, because I've often have lowered our fees just because I know that the building doesn't have um a lot of money, but the works need to be done. But often, I've mentioned that to, a few people, and they're like, well, it's your time basically. So leaseholders understanding that we are actually working and not overcharging for, the reports, the communication between all the parties,
absolutely.
contractors, surveyors, leaseholders, tenants, anyone sending notices to everyone and
Yep,
every day and updates. That takes so much time because then you need to speak
absolutely.
to, right?
Absolutely. And they're also bearing in mind that, as I say, that they're also in that fee that they're paying you, they're also paying for your liability because, as I said, if you get that
Yeah.
process wrong, it can
Mhm.
cost you fortunes.
Absolutely.
In terms of those fees, those project management fees, obviously, a lot of leaseholders don't realise as well that obviously the Section 20 notices deal specifically with the qualifying works.
Mm.
So they'll see details of the quotes that we've obtained for those qualifying works, but it doesn't actually say anywhere that you put on there the fees for overseeing those works. So we tend to do that just so that when
Yeah.
leaseholders question the whole process, they can see what the qualifying works are and what is over that threshold. But then, in addition to that, what the project management fees are or what the surveyor's fees are, just so they're clear on what they're paying.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's you're right. It's a tricky one.
Absolutely. And it's also um, uh, when a leaseholders are recommending a contractor, and
Hmm.
then I've I have like a little list that I basically send to the leaseholders, and I say, well, you can use your contractor, and
Yeah,
especially if it's a smaller building and it might be a freeholder involved, and he's like, okay, just let the leaseholders deal with that chosen contractor. But I always make sure that, because I know what that can bring, and to some contractors, some contractors are amazing, but some contractors can not do a great job. And it is so important that you list, for leaseholders to do a bit of due diligence on that person, because it could be someone they just found on Check a Trade, or like, someone local who maybe doesn't have experience in major works, in, decorating, repointing windows and so on. And maybe they've done bits and bobs, but maybe not to such extent. And it's so important to get reference. It's kind of like when we tender, leaseholders do request for reference to be provided, and so
Yeah.
on. So
Yeah.
it's the same with contractors. And then it has happened many times. They're like, okay, this is not correct. It's not right. Something went wrong. Can you please contact that contractor? Oh, was that not the chosen contractor of
Mhm.
yours? And then
Yeah.
how do you deal with that? Because
Yeah.
you didn't get paid for it. They've chose
No,
it. And
that's
then, telling them that it's not our responsibility. We're not taking responsibility on someone you've chosen.
no,
And there's just
no.
all these little things that we are battling with, trying to
Absolutely.
explain and
Yeah. Yeah.
educate. And then it comes all the disputes. Like, how do you tackle disputes with leaseholders, Tony?
That's a difficult one. I mean, I'm touching wood here. I've been here nearly 20 years, and I've
Mm,
never had a case be referred to the first tier tribunal. And I think you speak to a lot of London agents, and they're kind of doing them quite frequently. So I would say that from our point of view, one of the key things just comes back to communication. I think if you communicate um, properly with your leaseholders, answer any questions,
yeah,
be open and transparent, invite them in to see to see all the information, the quotes, the tenders, the
yeah,
invoices, whatever that may be. I think if you're completely open, then you tend not to get challenges. From leaseholders. So yeah, I mean it's, and
yeah,
also where I've taken on new business, I've taken on new clients over the years. That's one of the key issues that they have with their previous agent is quite often communication. So
yeah,
I think that's key in our business. You've got to be able to communicate
yeah,
well, and in the long run that will serve you well because it will avoid
yeah.
difficult issues.
Absolutely. And leaseholders amongst themselves is something that we deal on daily basis. And again, how do you say, well, we're not here to resolve neighborly matters? Do you get
No, I
a
mean
lot of
I
these?
kind of I was I've been used to dealing with that since my social housing days.
Oh, right.
Back then, kind of, we dealt with a lot of antisocial behaviour in social housing with social housing
Yeah.
tenants, and there's a lot of antisocial behaviour. I'm not even sure that they're a thing anymore, but we used to be involved in antisocial behaviour orders, ASBOs.
Oh,
At one
wow.
time years ago, that was all in the news, but nowadays I'm not even sure that's still a thing. But yeah, so I'm kind of used to dealing with tenant disputes like that. And there are some options out there available, like mediators, and sometimes the local authority can step in to help.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, it's not really one for us to kind of get involved in. We're there to manage the building, the common areas, make sure everything's compliant and safe and managed well, and all of that. But in terms of managing kind of disputes between residents and leaseholders, that's not really our bag. We'll help out as much as we can, and as I say, there are options out there to kind of refer them to.
Yeah.
But you're right. It goes back to dealing with people rather than buildings. That's really the
Yeah.
key issue. You've got to be able to do
But
that.
it's a fine line of our engagement as well, because um, we can be attacked as someone that you are trying to be in the middle, resolve, use kind words and, and sensible words to kind of, end this. And
Mm.
then the attack may come to you. And I'm looking forward to having Jodie Fraser actually, because she on this podcast, because she talks about this, and obviously she's part of Jodie, um, the Holy Guzzard.
Yeah.
So because she will have a lot of insights to say about that, and there are a lot of property managers out there that are, um, you know, part of that that they have been abused and they suffered
Yep.
and struggled with
Yep.
all that.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
I think the most of I've been close to that is just being, told to leave meeting, that I'm not professional, or like I don't know anything,
Yeah.
and so on. But
Yeah.
nothing else of like, major. Have you ever experienced anything similar?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been at AGMs where we were in a big town hall once. There was kind of 50, 60 people, and someone turned up drunk and was just heckling me throughout the whole meeting, shouting abuse and
Mm.
just generally not being a nice person. And
Yeah,
yeah, so
terrible.
it is that being a property manager is a tough job. And um, yeah, I mean, I mentioned recently that we mentioned earlier, sorry, that that I stood down from the head of
Yeah.
department here at Caxtons, and the reason for that was that I was really I went for a spell sort of 4 or 5 years ago where I was really struggling with my mental health.
Okay.
The job isn't easy, and
No.
running a department, particularly through COVID, was very difficult. And so I decided, as I say, after a few years, to kind of take a step back.
Good.
But
Good for
yeah,
you.
kind of now it's once I in fact now I sort of campaign quite a bit for better mental health in the industry. The Caxtons, they made me a mental health champion. So
Amazing.
yeah, it's kind of helping your colleagues and that, just to kind of watch out for themselves. Jodie posts frequently about that kind of thing, and
Yeah.
and burnouts, which does happen unfortunately in this
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. So yeah.
In terms of relationship with leaseholders, what do you think that over the years have succeeded? Like, what do you have any tactics, or like
Yeah,
what do you
so
think?
definitely. I learned long time ago that the best way to kind of diffuse a situation, or to better your relationship with that leaseholder, is to meet them face to face. It's so easy to kind of respond to their
Mm,
emails and deal with them over the phone, but if you offer them a meeting, a face to face meeting, yeah, it's a bit of time out of your day, but you know what? If you can, yeah, improve that relationship and deal with that leaseholder, and you come away with that leaseholder being much happier and
yeah.
satisfied that you've taken the time to go and meet with them and discuss any issues they've got. That definitely works. It's kind of a bit of an old school method, but
Mm,
definitely face to face. And
yeah.
yeah, you can't
And
do that when you're managing large portfolios for everybody. Of course you can't. But
no.
I think sometimes when, as I say, when you get those leaseholders that are emailing daily or ringing up routinely, I think that you can sort of close that down a bit by actually just
Mm.
going out and meeting them and listening to what they have to say.
It's definitely also that we've gone so digital in terms of
Mm-hmm.
emails and calls and even WhatsApp now. We have
100%.
blocks where it's all on WhatsApp groups, and and we're using technology of all the softwares and everything to
Yeah.
keep the communication with leaseholders. But what
Yeah.
you've mentioned earlier about mental health, is it's not just us, it's also leaseholders that are also struggling, having their personal matters to resolve. But I also want to say to leaseholders is like, be mindful when you send an email to your property manager and your requests, because they have to be reasonable. And how many times did you work overtime? I can't
Yeah.
count the hours.
Unfortunately, it's routine for a property manager to kind of, as I say, get in early, stay a bit late, quite often not have a proper lunch break because you're working through. So yeah, yeah, you say it's something you've got to keep on top of. And and as I say, you're right, you're absolutely right. I mean, leaseholders too, it's that they've bought a property, sometimes not quite understanding their obligations, and so they can get hefty bills come out the blue,
Mm,
and need to find the means to pay those. And so yeah, absolutely, it's not the life of a leaseholder is not easy either.
No, not at all. And how many times we've had a call from someone that recently moved in, and you will have a conversation with them because they usually call and they're like, "It's my first property," and they're usually young, and they don't know anything. Mom and dad bought it, or they bought it, and they don't understand. And how many times we kind of fell in their shoes, and they was like, "Okay, I need to sit down here for a few minutes and explain to this young person what they actually got in." And
Yeah.
how many of those calls you've made? I can't count them.
Oh, loads, absolute loads. Yeah, definitely.
But it is rewarding as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have stayed in the industry for as long as I have if it hadn't been rewarding. Definitely, it definitely is, and that personal connection that you get with the leaseholders definitely is something that yeah, it makes the job worthwhile for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And what advice would you give to someone that is coming into the industry and understanding all of this that we kind of talked about, and more that is involved in block management? Because very often, and you coming as a 16 years old and not knowing what you're getting into, back in the days was kind of quieter industry.
Mm,
but
yeah,
now
definitely.
but
Mm.
now you just don't have enough hours in the day to learn all the updates and, new legislations, and, to keep up to date. And thanks to obviously TPI, and, keeping us on the loop and creating such a valuable, organization that is helping us. But someone that is coming in, all this that we talked about, the interaction between leaseholders and us, what advice would you give to someone not to get
Don't
scared? Not to get scared.
I think I think as someone coming in new into the industry, I think you've got to have a lot of, as I say, a lot of empathy for leaseholders and residents. The kind of the property side of it, you can learn that trade.
The
You know,
technical stuff,
as you
yeah.
say, that the TPI offer a whole host of courses and
Yeah,
training that you can go on to learn that craft as property managers. But what it really boils down to is you've got to kind of be a bit of a people person coming into the industry. You've got to be able to deal with people and have empathy for them. As I say, because the job itself will come. You will learn to manage properties and understand accounts and budgets and all that kind of thing, and reading a lease, all that stuff you learn as you go on. But dealing with people is
very
definitely
important.
the highest priority.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any changes that you would like to see in block management?
As I mentioned earlier, definitely the Section 20 kind of
Yeah.
that needs to change. That threshold needs to go up
Oh my God.
because that will make our lives a lot easier. And it's just not practical nowadays for the threshold to be
Oh my
250.
God. Especially in smaller buildings.
That's where life is particularly difficult. You want to replace the carpet, and you want to go ahead and do that, but all of a sudden you've got to go out and get a number of quotes, and yeah, so just delays the process unnecessarily. Apart from that, obviously they're talking about. Long been talking about the industry being regulated because, of course, at the moment we are essentially
Yeah,
kind of unregulated. Obviously, the TPI do
they're bad.
great work
Mm.
in terms of promoting the best practice and policing the industry, and we're obviously audited by them. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of it's got to come in legislation to regulate managing agents and property
Yeah.
managers. There's got to be something there to really have teeth, and because there are unfortunately still a lot of kind of rogue landlords out there. And yeah, so it's that hopefully that will come within the next couple of years.
You
I
think
just hope.
couple of years?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I just hope that that those property managers that have been hardworking managers for, in the industry for some time, I
Mhm.
just hope that they are still recognised for the work that they've done, and that I mean, I was recently made a fellow of the TPI,
Oh, well done.
which for me was great. It was great
Yeah,
news, and it kind of just reflects, particularly if you've been in the industry a long time and kind
yeah.
of done stuff outside of your own sort of job to contribute to the industry, then that's something that yeah, I'm hoping that once the regulator eventually comes in, that they'll recognise those people, at least that have been in the property management industry doing good work.
Yeah, and all companies now are giving great support to property managers. There is the benefits of, getting some time off and studying. I definitely didn't have that time given when I started, my career in block management. And ever since I formed a core, it's been very difficult because, as we talked about in the past, almost an hour of our engagement and the day to day and the hours that we put in. It has been difficult, and it is definitely something on my list. And only this year I'm getting into, registering the company with TPI. But again, it's just been, the time to, apart from having a personal life too, and
Yeah, yeah.
because because it is difficult, and
Oh, absolutely.
it
Yeah,
is it is it is the time to allocate, "Okay, I'm doing this today." So
yeah,
I'm definitely good at giving the time to, people I work with, but
yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't given the time for me yet. But
yeah.
running a business, it's been a roller coaster,
Oh, yeah. I
so
can imagine. I can
yeah,
imagine.
I'm hoping. Um, what what is the best advice that you've been given in your career that has helped you still
Ah,
being here and going on strong?
yeah. Good question. Really. Yeah, I don't know. I think, as I say, I think my boss in my previous job, River Heights, kind of just as I
Mhm.
said, goes back to being empathetic. Really, kind of having empathy for people, and as you mentioned earlier, it's like service charge arrears recovery. It's hard for people at the moment, and you've got to be prepared to kind of have conversations with difficult conversations with people, and empathize with them, and
Yeah.
come to some arrangement to kind of sort of sort that out. But yeah, in this industry, it's I think you've got to be empathetic, definitely.
Yeah. And just because you mentioned earlier about, mental health and, burnt out,
Hmm.
how what advice? Um, I won't go I won't ask you personal questions of how you you've managed that, but what advice would you give to someone, and obviously you advocating, avoiding burned out, and
Yeah,
what
I
can you
mean,
do?
it's a slippery slope,
Mm,
in terms of, as we mentioned, you get in early, you stay a bit late, you work for your lunch. You know, it's a slippery slope then checking your emails kind of outside of work.
yeah,
You kind of, that quickly becomes a habit.
yeah,
And you particularly now where a lot of people are working remotely, it's more important than ever that you've got to set yourself boundaries.
yeah,
Set yourself a strict timetable, make sure you only work the hours you're supposed to be working.
yeah,
Don't check those emails outside of work. Leave work at work and have home at home.
yeah,
And particularly, as I say, because now people are working remotely, it's a bit easier to kind of slip into that. Well, I'll work a bit extra because I'm at home, and you can't. You've got to be regimented about it. You've got to be absolutely kind of work your hours, and that's it. If you don't get to that email that day, it will still be there the next day. So yeah, my advice would be, as I say, set yourself boundaries. Make sure that you're not kind of checking emails outside of work. And yeah, and just look out for yourself. It's important that you keep on
yeah.
top of your own mental health.
And don't be afraid to say to colleagues or your manager that you are feeling under pressure. This is a high
Mhm.
high pressure job. So
100%, 100%.
in terms of closing thoughts, any thoughts to, or anything you want to say to leaseholders, directors, PMs, just something in short to keep the relationship going in good terms, really. you know?
Yeah, I think, as I say, it's kind of it is a difficult industry to be in, property management. And I've seen both sides. As I say, I've seen social housing and I've seen the private sector. So I've done a bit of both, and both has, its ups and
Yeah.
downs, and it's both difficult. But yeah, I would say the key thing in this industry is communication.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the leaseholders need to communicate with you, your directors need to communicate with you, and vice versa. You communicating back with them. And I think if you can crack that and get good communication going, you'll solve a lot of
Yeah.
problems.
Patience and understanding from both sides. It's what it takes,
Definitely,
I guess. Yeah.
definitely, yeah,
Tony, it's been pleasure. Thank you so much
lovely.
for your time.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.